Hola, and welcome once again to the Schaefer Small Engine Shop and Two-Car Garage. Today, we're going to do a follow-up video on this Husqvarna 435 that was in the last video I did with two Husqvarnas. The big one ran great, 455 Rancher. This one wouldn't run at all. This is the one that I spun with an electric drill at 2,000 RPM, and I couldn't even get it to pop. So I'm gonna bring you in a little closer, show you what I've done to this thing, and what finally happened to it. Hang on. When I couldn't get this chainsaw to start, I began replacing parts. The first thing I replaced was the starter pulley. It's kind of cracked and worn over here, and I thought, well, maybe I'm not getting a full pull on this thing. So I got another starting pulley, put it in there, made no difference whatsoever. Well, the saw's a 2009 model, so the logical thing to do is to get a new carburetor. And I got a brand new carburetor for it. Aftermarket, of course, Chinesium model. Hell, they're all Chinesium models. So I put it on, pretty easy installation, no difference whatsoever. So I thought, well, I can get a coil for this thing fairly cheap. Maybe it's just not getting enough spark. Looked to me like it was getting plenty of spark, but I bought a new coil, put a coil on it, no difference whatsoever. I had already replaced the primer bulb and the spark plug, and eventually I ended up replacing the sprocket and the little needle bearing that goes in the sprocket, but those were all after the fact. So I'm convinced that this saw has got an air leak, which is why I cannot get it to fire. So let me bring you around and we'll take a look at the Mufkin, and I'll show you what I did to it. To pressure test a chainsaw or other two-stroke engines, what you have to do is remove the carburetor and remove the muffler and make little rubber patches that you can screw on between the muffler and the exhaust manifold and the carburetor and the intake manifold, so that everything is airtight. Then you put the piston down at the bottom, and you take your mighty vac, put it in the spark plug hole, hook your mighty vac up, and pump you 5 or 6 pounds of air into the crankcase. And if it won't hold pressure, then you got a leak. You've either got a crankcase, a cylinder leak, you've got a seal on the drive side and a seal on the starting side, rubber seals, they might be leaking. So I attempted to do that with this saw. The problem was right here, the muffler. Up inside these two tunnels here are two socket head cap screws that hold the muffler to the cylinder. Well, one of them came out without any problem. The other one, as I mentioned in the other video, the inside of it rounded out where an Allen wrench of any kind was not going to turn this thing. And I fooled with it, and here's how I finally got the muffler off. The first thing I did was stand the saw up on end, like so, filled these two channels up with WD-40 2 or 3 times, and I was taking a punching down there on the Allen bolt and trying to break it loose. I actually eventually took my propane torch and heated it and then quenched it with cold water to try to break it loose. Well, I'm not sure whether any of that did any good or not. It certainly didn't do any harm. But finally, I figured out, well, I'm going to have to try an easy out. So I took my handy set of easy outs from Harbor Freight, of course, as any other place, and it had a extractor that was it was too big to fit into the Allen bolt. It would start to go in, but it wouldn't go in. So I took the extractor here and I took a persuader and I put it in, pop, 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 persuading it with a hammer, and it did in fact drive into the head of the hex head. And then I put a wrench on it, and by gosh, it started to come out, and I turned it a few times and it came out and I could get the muffler off of it. Now, prior to all of this, I had taken this muffler and completely covered it with JB Weld. And I had it all sealed up on the top, but it wouldn't hold pressure because it was leaking from where the muffler joins into the manifold. So that's why I had to finally get the muffler completely off of it. Use my rubber gasket here, my rubber sealer, put the muffler back on with new cap screws, I might add, and I got it sealed off. The carburetor was easy, got it sealed off, pumped it up to 6 pounds of pressure, and it held 6 pounds of pressure for 2 hours. So I knew whatever the problem is, it is not a bad seal or a bad cylinder gasket. It's got to be something else. So I started exploring a little further. I fooled with the carburetor. I fooled with spark plugs. I spun it with the electric drill, and it just did not want to work. Didn't want to fire. And I talked to my cousin who owns the saw, and I said, we have a couple of options here. Number one, you can junk this thing. Number two, I can take it to a Husqvarna saw shop, Husqvarna dealer, and see if they can make it run, but it's going to be on your nickel, not mine. And he said, scrap it. Okay, we'll do that. So I took off the new carburetor, put the old carburetor back on it, took off the coil, put the old coil back on it, and the only thing that I did that I had not done before is when I had the carburetor off, putting the old carburetor back on, these saws and other two-cycle equipment have got little pulse holes in them. And this hole transfers pulses from the crankcase to the carburetor. Piston goes down, positive pressure, works the gasket. Piston goes up, negative pressure, works the little pumping gasket in the opposite direction. Up, down, pump fuel, pump fuel, pump fuel, pump fuel. So I decided that I would try to clean out the little passage that's inside the saw, and I ran a wire through it. Didn't get too very far, but I took compressed air and blew through this thing, and I could feel the air finally start to come out the spark plug hole here. And I put it back together. I told the saw, you're either going to start or you're going to the junkyard. And the saw came to its senses and fired up. And it continues to fire up. Now, it is not the easiest saw in the world to start, but it does start. And when it starts, it runs strong. So what we have is, we were one step away from the graveyard, the junk pile, and now we have a working $400 chainsaw. Or it was $400 when it's new. They still make this saw. This is the current model. I don't know whether the current ones are made in Sweden or made in Arkansas, or Husqvarna is abandoning this monster plant they have up in Nashville, Arkansas, moving all of their production of saws and probably other handheld stuff. They're going to move it to China or Brazil. And very disappointing. About 400 jobs up in Nashville, Arkansas are down the drain. So we'll take a look at this thing, see if it wants to cooperate. What I've had to do with this saw to get it started is to put the choke on, pull it 4 or 5 times. It rarely ever pops off. Then I take the choke off and I use the cable tie that I have attached to it to hold the throttle wide open. And I've been 100% successful doing that method. So I'm gonna pull on it a few times here. I have started this saw several hours ago. We'll see what it does. All right, we got the throttle wide open now.
sounded like it wanted to pop off, but it didn't actually pop.
Little saw runs strong. Idle's about 3,500, and it'll rev up to 92, 9,300. It screams when it's running. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.